9 o'clock straight up. We're planners, so we better respect time. Good morning, I'm Marsha Rood. I'm president of the Los Angeles Planning History Group, and it's a pleasure to have you all here. I know several of you, and thank you for coming. Our colloquium, the 17th, is about the Olympics, and it's entitled Los Angeles and the Olympic Games, 1932, 1984, and 2028, applying lessons learned from the past to the future. In 5 years, Los Angeles will join London and Paris as the only three-time Olympic host cities. We believe that understanding the planning efforts and legacies of Los Angeles' previous two Olympics can provide an invaluable framework for planning the 2028 Games. Los Angeles Planning History Group promotes the study of planning of the greater Los Angeles region and how lessons of the past can be applied to present and future planning and policy. In keeping with our mission, today's colloquium has two main goals: to gain insights from scholars, planners, former Olympic organizers, and nonprofit organizations into the lessons learned from the 32 and 84 Olympic Games. Both positive and negative lessons learned will be explored today. And two, most importantly, is to involve you in identifying and exploring key challenges and opportunities facing the planners and organizers of the upcoming 2028 Games. You all, the program was out there, and I'm sure you have it. We do want to talk about, number one, we'll have two sessions. One is entitled The 1932 Olympic Games Planning, Organization, Staging, and Innovations. We're going to have a break, and you may have all by now found the bathrooms that are out there, and they're unlocked. I checked that. And then we have the break. We're going to have a break, and the bathroom. Those are very important. Session 2, the 1984 Olympic Games, Doing More with Less and Long-Term Legacies. And we'll have lunch here. We have box lunches. And we are going to do a facilitated discussion, which is the key to what we do. And Laura Stetson, where's Laura? Somewhere over there, yeah. Laura's going to lead the discussion. She's an expert in facilitated discussion in communities and groups like this. And also we're having, you may know about the conversations with the author. Our next one is June 29th. They're all at 6 p.m. on Zoom. And our author this time will be Vinayak Barney, who's going to address 50 streets throughout the world and comparing them. So that could be an interesting thing. I'd like at this time, importantly, to announce our new officers. First, President Mark Herwick. Would you stand, Mark? He's our new president. Supervising Regional Planner, LA County Regional Planning Department. Second, Art Cueto. Art, there he is. He's right next to me. Transportation Land Use Consultant. Treasurer, Ken Farfsing. Former city managers of South Pass and Signal Hill. Secretary, IT, Lillian Birkenheim. I think she's out registering people. She's a community organizer and advocate for neighborhoods. Webmaster Alan Rifkin. There he is. There he is. Returning board members, Ken Bernstein. Ken, there he is. He's way back there. I don't know that Erin's with us. She's key to our efforts here. She's a curator, assistant curator of architecture and photography at the Huntington. Todd Gish couldn't be with us. He's a vital part of our board. He had car trouble, so here we are, LA. And I'm returning board member. I'm a community activist and former development administrator for the city of Pasadena. Sergio Valdez. Sergio, he's out doing work, you know. He's working. Former City of Los Angeles Transportation Planning Liaison. I think Betsy Wiseman will join us soon. Yeah, she's going to join us soon. Our new members: Meredith Drake Rutan, Associate Dean, Graduate School, Office of the Provost, USC. Danny, yeah. You here? You're here. There you are. Would you stand and be welcomed by everybody? There she is. And Danny Wu, Executive Director, Campus Planning, Transportation, Sustainability, Cal Poly Pomona. He couldn't join us today, or said I haven't had the pleasure of meeting him. The important part is to thank the organizers, to thank the Huntington Library, Art Museum, and Botanical Gardens, and particularly Erin Chase, for her dedicated efforts to make this colloquium happen. Our special thanks go to board members Art Cueto for organizing and spearheading this colloquium, and important to board members Mark Herwick, Ken Farfsing, Todd Gish, Betsy Weissman, and Alan Rifkin for being instrumental in making it happen. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Rick Cole, a friend of 40 years. Happy he could be here. He's our keynote speaker for today. He will talk to us about A Tale of Three Cities. Rick Cole is currently the Chief Deputy Controller for the City of Los Angeles. His career includes serving as the Executive Director for the Congress for Urbanism and City Manager for the cities of Santa Monica, Ventura, and Azusa. Rick is an adjunct professor at Pepperdine University School of Public Policy and assistant professor at Occidental College's Urban and Environmental Policy Institute, and is a planning commissioner for the city of Pasadena. Rick holds a bachelor's degree in American Studies from Occidental College and a master's degree in journalism from Columbia University. With that, I give you Rick Cole.
Marsha can't leave yet with some acknowledgement. I've been with this organization for, 15 years, and I think Marsha's been president most of that time.
Yeah.
And she's provided terrific leadership, has helped us with so many different colloquiums that they probably would not have happened with your leadership. So we want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Marsha.
Tremendously. So we have a little something for you.
Oh. This is a complete surprise.
Just a little acknowledgement.
A potted plant.
A potted plant, yes. Let's move forward.
Thank you,
thank you very much. Thank you. Now, without further ado,
thank you.
Mr. Cole.
So our topic today is less about the games themselves and more about the impact on one of the world's greatest and most diverse, most dynamic, and most complicated cities, the city of Los Angeles. And Los Angeles is both a city and a county and an idea. And that is an idea that has evolved over time. As we'll conclude, Christopher Hawthorne, who used to be the architectural critic for the Los Angeles Times, talked about the three Los Angeleses. The first Los Angeles was that born from the dusty Pueblo back in the 18th century, that grew into an American classic city in the American era. A city built around the man whose wealth we enjoy today, Henry Huntington. A city built around the streetcar. A city very much absorbing the Midwestern origin and eastern seaboard origin of American architecture and city building. The second Los Angeles, which followed the 1932 Olympics, was the Los Angeles of the automobile, the quintessential city of sprawl, the mother of all sprawl. And the third Los Angeles that Christopher Hawthorne posits is the Los Angeles no longer of the single-family home and the green lawn and the automobile in the two-car garage, but a third Los Angeles that our generation, our people, our time will create in the future. And the Olympics of 1932, 1984, and 2028 very much embody those three Los Angeleses, as we'll find. So, The 1932 Olympics. Los Angeles was the only serious bidder because the world couldn't afford to put on an Olympics. This is a recurring theme. And this was to be the 10th Olympic Games. And Los Angeles aspired to be a great city. If you, it's kind of a sad sight these days, but if you walk by the parking structure of the now departed Los Angeles Times, there's a quote from Otis Chandler, who said, or not Otis Chandler, his grandfather, who said, "I see Los Angeles as one of the world's, perhaps the greatest city in the world." That was the era of 1932. No one beyond Los Angeles believed that. Los Angeles was the kind of place that H.L. Mencken, the great American critic of the early part of the 20th century, he said, America is tilted, and everything that isn't nailed down eventually rolls into Los Angeles. And this was the era of A.B. Semple McPherson. The great California historian Kevin Starr wrote about this as material dreams. During the 1920s, the population of the city doubled from what it had been in 1910, in 1920. An extraordinary era of boosterism, a sense that we could build a great city in the Los Angeles Times view, which was the most powerful institution in Southern California, that would be free of unions, would be Republican, would be based upon a capitalist model of success, and would be based around old-fashioned, Midwestern, white, Christian values, planted in a place that had been indigenous lands, that had been under Spanish and later Mexican authority, but which, except in a kind of romantic way of red tiled roofs and Olvera Street, was to be erased and supplanted by an American vision based very much, as we now, I think, have come to realize, in white supremacy. And so there's a duality about that boosterism. It was a boosterism that was not just about progress, but was a vision based upon progress with a very harsh edge. The County Board of Supervisors just celebrated, if that's the word, marked, perhaps a better word, the anniversary of the Zoot Suit riots, where American servicemen, for a variety of reasons, were stirred up to beat up Mexican Americans on the streets of Los Angeles, and many died. And it was an extraordinary period which we largely forgot until recently. The Los Angeles of those times was a city that looked very similar to Cleveland or Pittsburgh or Philadelphia. It was a city built around the streetcars, and this was the coming of age, to be able to host the world in 1932. And out of that, this was a time pregnant with possibility. The Olmsted firm, as many of you know, had done a plan for the future of Los Angeles, sponsored by, of all institutions, the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce. And that plan was, instead of building Los Angeles around freeways, it was to build it around parkways, to build it around a green Los Angeles River, to build the city in a way that would celebrate the natural climate of one of the world's few Mediterranean climates. And instead, what happened was a very different vision, coming out of the Olympics, coming out of the Depression, influenced by an international embrace of the automobile. Henry Ford's River Rouge plant was looked up to by people as diverse as Adolf Hitler, Vladimir Lenin, and Benito Mussolini, who all saw the future of the machine age in Detroit. And so following the Olympics in the late 30s, the first freeway was built in the West Coast. This was built at the same time that Robert Moses was building his parkways in New York City, that Benito Mussolini was building the Autopista in Italy, and Adolf Hitler was building the Autobahn in Germany. So we were in good company with Robert Moses, Benito Mussolini, and fast forward to the culmination of the auto era in Los Angeles. The crest of having built our city around freeways, having sprawled across Southern California, having created this place called Southern California, and the Los Angeles Times being this thick on a Sunday. Wow. Yeah, now it's as thin as toilet paper. But Los Angeles, if 1932 was Los Angeles' introduction to the world, 1984 was its introduction to being one of the world's great cities. Dorothy Chandler had built the Music Center, the Cultural Center. Tom Bradley had presided over the building of a new skyscraper downtown. Kenny Hahn and Tom Bradley had spearheaded the adoption of the master plan for mass transit. So we were finally going to be a city that had a subway, a cultural center, a skyline worthy of a great city, and we were to be the capital of the Pacific Rim, the place where Latin America, Asia, the United States will all converge, and we would be the capital of that era. And we would invite the world to see and to be part of this great international city. And again, we were the only serious bidder, not because the world was in a depression, but because the Olympics were in a depression. Montreal had been a financial fiasco. Munich had been marked by terrorism and death. The Olympics had run out of steam. And Peter Ueberroth, who was at the time an obscure business person, came out of Korn Ferry, the recruitment firm, decided that the way to put on the Olympics was not to have the city put on the Olympics, but rather to have a private entity put on the Olympics. The Olympic Charter had to be rewritten to allow that. And they did it reluctantly because no one else wanted the Olympics. So they said, okay, we are going to trust a private group to put on the Olympics. And it was private in every sense of the word. Critics called it the Hamburger Olympics because, of course, McDonald's was one of the prime sponsors, so was Budweiser. 125, there was the official sunglasses of the Olympics, the official this, the official that. And the result was an extraordinary success. In every sense of the word, people came away impressed. There was a great fear that Los Angeles would be gridlocked, right? Because we were famous for being the city of cars and traffic. And people were so scared to drive that it was the smoothest traffic in 20 years. Like Carmageddon, it turned out to be a big anticlimax in terms of traffic. And the Olympics, part of the reason the Olympics were so financially profitable is unlike the cities that had built a new Olympic village, new Olympic facilities, we recycled the facilities from the 1930s and the ones that had been built in the interim since, using the Rose Bowl for soccer, using the Colloquium, which had been built for the 32 Olympics as the main track and field, but venues as far afield as Mission Viejo, down in Orange County, all the way to Santa Monica. There was a sense that Los Angeles was putting on, Los Angeles writ large was putting on these Olympics. The city of sprawl would put on sprawling Olympics. The brilliance of, and someone will remember her name at the moment.
Sussman.
Yes, Deborah Sussman.
Deborah Sussman.
Designed an absolutely brilliant graphics package. And for the cost of printing up banners, created this illusion that all of Los Angeles, greater Los Angeles, was the Olympic Village by simply lining the streets with these colorful and dramatic banners. Now banners on street poles are a cliche. At the time, they were a brilliant innovation. And Deborah Sussman deserves a lot of the credit for the sense that everyone was a part of this Olympic event, even if you couldn't afford the tickets, even if it was simply an inconvenience to you. You felt a part of this, and they recruited thousands of volunteers, which also increased this sense. It was the zenith of local pride, a sense that Los Angeles had finally arrived as a great city. It had gotten its act together, it had put things together. We came out of the Olympics, we had saved the Olympics, we came out of the Olympics with a huge amount of money that could be invested in youth sports for generations, which that legacy continues today. And as I said, the traffic flowed smoothly. All of the fears did not materialize. There was no violence, there was no terrorism. The Olympics were peaceful, they moved on. And they were paired with an International Olympic Arts Festival, which gave an even greater sense that these were not just about sports and corporations, but that this was about the cultural richness of Los Angeles. They did like a 6-hour play of the Mahabharata from India. There was a sense of sophistication about Los Angeles, that we had come of age, that finally New York could no longer look down their nose at us, despite the fact that to this day the New York Times looks down upon us. And the Olympics themselves, despite the fact that the Soviet bloc boycotted the games, because we had boycotted the 1980 Olympics in their country, in Moscow. And so the United States just cleaned up, right? Ironically, the '84 Olympics produced 84 gold medals for the United States. And then just 8 years later, the Rodney King riots tore the mask off of Los Angeles's great pretensions to be capital of affluence and success and prosperity and opportunity, and caused a wrenching self-reappraisal about what had been ignored with the colorful banners running down Olympic Boulevard and the great thoroughfares of Los Angeles. The neighborhoods that had not benefited from the 74,000 jobs that came and went, that had not been beneficiaries of the billions of dollars that had flowed in, that there were neighborhoods of enormous suffering, discrimination, and over-policing that had been celebrated because we had these safe Olympics and we not had any terrorism, but it was really the LAPD had become a kind of an occupying army with sophisticated technology. And so we went from a time when everything about Los Angeles had seemed to have turned to gold, to a time when Los Angeles had seemed to have turned, its dreams had seemed to turn to ashes. That in many ways sort of buried the period of the Olympics. We swung, as often happens in our country, from over hubris. I guess I'm probably duplicative. From hubris to a sense that we were a failed state, And literally within a decade, people were writing off California as a dream that had failed. Well, now we're in 2023, so we have 5 years until the Olympics come. And this time, I can't speak, sometimes someone smarter than me said the past is a foreign country. It's hard for us to put ourselves in the shoes of the people of 1932. It's possible for us to those of us of a certain age, to remember 1984, but it's a memory, and memory does strange things to us. But we're living in a time now where the Olympics are in the future, and for the first time, there's serious opposition to the Olympics. 1984, there was skepticism about the Olympics, that we were getting into something that we couldn't afford. But this time there's active opposition to the idea that, that the world's intelligence services and technology will be deployed to make this a police state. There is suspicion that the people living in tents are going to be swept up and sent to Lancaster for a couple of weeks. There is a no Olympics movement, but the Olympics are coming, barring an extraordinary black swan. And so the question is not whether we have the Olympics, but what kind of Olympics we will have, and what will be the legacy for Los Angeles when the Olympics are done. Right now, we are in a feverish effort to prepare the infrastructure. So billions of dollars are being spent between now and 2028 on the airport, on the light rail and subway system. A huge amount of construction is already underway, and more to come in the next 5 years. And so let me conclude. Again, my goal is simply to set the stage for the greater detail and your contributions to thinking about what kind of Olympics we want to create, because the future is still plastic. We will shape both the Olympics and what comes after them. And so the question is, what kind of third Los Angeles will it be? Will it be one that centers equity, one where the benefits flow not just to the corporations that sponsor the Olympics, not just to major institutions that will be the cornerstones, but what about the people of Los Angeles, the 4 million people, a third of whom are clinging by their fingernails to housing at a time of extraordinary rent burdens, who are working hard but hardly doing well. And so can we make sure that this investment actually creates a more livable Los Angeles, creates a more walkable Los Angeles, creates a Los Angeles where we are less privatized in our lives, where we look around and the people who we don't share the same neighborhood with, or the same religion, or the same language, or the same facial color, that we can find in these Olympic Games the original spirit that is supposed to animate them, this sense of internationalism, the sense that people across the planet are brothers and sisters. And that means that we've got to not just build transportation systems, we've got to build the housing that's so desperately needed, especially the housing for people who can't afford housing. Because there's going to be a lot of people here in 2028, and if that leads to more evictions, more people out on the streets, it's very hard, I think, for Los Angeles to be able to show its face with pride. And creative placemaking, right? Deborah Sussman was able, with the magic of banners, to create a sense of place in often placeless Los Angeles. So what are we going to do in our neighborhoods? What are we going to do with these? We need more than banners on Olympic Boulevard. We need to tame those stroads that are the source of traffic deaths, ugliness, grit. Those should be magnificent boulevards. not just for 2 weeks when the banners come down, but for the next generation. And most of all, I think, we have to restore a sense of democracy. That the Olympics are not an occupying army. That the Olympics are our chance to welcome the world. Our chance not just to welcome the elite athletes, but to welcome people all over the world that for that brief 2 weeks are going to be connected virtually. Billions of people. And we are going to be the anchor of that sense of place. We will be the place in the world, assuming we're not in a world war at that point, or a worldwide depression. We will be the place where all of the world will be thinking about who we are as a planet. Given the climate crisis, given international tensions, given the challenges of equity around the world, this is our chance to set the example. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rick. That was incredible. Our speakers today are we're going to focus on the 1932 Olympics. And what I want to do is just kind of set the stage for the 32 Olympics. Now, the world had been in turmoil since the onset of the Great Depression in October of 1929. A person viewing Los Angeles from City Hall in 1932 peered out on a restive, sprawling, and smoky metropolis. The term smog had not yet been coined, but worsening air quality was a growing issue. As Rick indicated, almost 1.2 million people called Los Angeles their home. Second largest was Long Beach, 142,000 residents, and nearby Pasadena had about 76,000 people living there. There were 2 million registered vehicles in California, almost one vehicle for every 2 people. Poverty and race were endemic. There were 15 million workers unemployed in the country. That's a 20% unemployment rate. Unemployment in California was even higher at 28%. 50% of the nation's banks had closed. Automobile manufacturing fell by 75% in 1932. It resulted in, today, what would be $3 billion in losses. Los Angeles County estimated that 10,000 transient men and boys were arriving monthly in the area. And statewide, Southern Pacific Railroad had evicted 80,000 migrants from its boxcars in 1 month in 1932. So within 3 years, Los Angeles would establish a committee on indigent alien transients to stem the human tide. The only crime was being poor. Migrant camps were basically migrant camps are located within blocks of downtown Los Angeles, what were called Hoovervilles. Now, Los Angeles in 1930 was described by one wag as a goulash of technocracy, state socialism, the Ku Klux Klan, populism, fascism, evangelism, and voodoo. Now, all mixed into this goulash was Billy Garland and the Los Angeles Olympic Organizing Committee, the power structure of Los Angeles, and they scrambled to save the games. As luck would have it, 3 large regional athletic venues had been constructed during the Roaring '20s: the World War I Memorial Coliseum, the Rose Bowl, and the Olympic Auditorium. And Los Angeles and surrounding cities and the Unified School District offered existing parks, pools, schools, and colleges where teams would practice. Golf courses were rented for equestrian and pentathlon events. LAPD donated their pistol range. Joint efforts were initiated with the Rolls Parade Association and City of Long Beach for cycling and rowing venues. Other venues for the games would need to be constructed, including a new Olympic Village for male athletes, constructed of prefab dormitories. The Coliseum was added to. And then female athletes figured prominently in the games for the first time. However, as dictated by the social mores of the time, female athletes were housed at the Chapman Hotel away from the men. Public safety was an issue even then. Over 1,000 LAPD officers were assigned to the games. Many of these officers were assigned to traffic control duties. And streets leading into the Colloquium were temporarily converted to one-directional thoroughfares. Traffic accidents dropped during the games. And the 10th Olympiad was the last to hold architecture, city planning, and art competitions geared on promoting athletic events. A local Pasadena resident, Ruth Miller Kempster, won the silver medal for her painting entitled Struggle. I'm going to show it to you in a second. And this was 4 years before Jesse Owens in the 1936 Berlin Olympics. Eddie Tolan and Ralph Metcalf sprinted into history. Metcalf would go on to win the silver medal, with Jesse Owens in 1936 taking the gold medal in a rebuff to Adolf Hitler's master race. Owens' record of 4 gold medals would stand for 52 years and was finally broken by Carl Lewis in 1984. So let's take a quick look at some of these. I'm going to go rapidly here. So that was the site of the Colosseum abandoned horse race track. Colosseum was added to originally 75,000 seats, all privately financed. Olympic Auditorium existed. I was amazed by that picture taken in 1932. It's pretty barren around the Olympic. And a cycling track built in the Rose Bowl. A beautification effort, nascent beautification, obviously. These are photos that appear in reports by the LA County Health Department, basically what are called poor shacks, homeless families. These are near the Coliseum in downtown Los Angeles. Mark will cover the Olympic Village in some detail, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the Olympic Village. These are the prefab structures that were built off-site and then shipped onto for the Olympic Village. Chapman Hotel, unfortunately, torn down and gone. The Olympic Swim Stadium was built from the ground up, still there. Marine Stadium is still there and used. It was a joint project. Long Beach dredged, and the Olympic Committee financed all the facilities. These are just some pictures of some of the various schools and other facilities that were available for practices for the teams. There's 14 city pools at the time. Pretty incredible. This is a picture out at UCLA, field hockey in training. Inside the Olympic Auditorium, set up for wrestling and for boxing. LAPD pistol range was double-decked. This is just a little picture of some of the security. The majority of the officers were assigned to traffic control, but there were other issues. And as I mentioned, there was an art and architecture competition. The last of the Olympics had actually had that. It was after 1932. There were no further architecture planning and art competitions. This is the Pasadena artist Ruth Miller Kempster. And this is, to me, a very powerful image. She was a protege of Diego Rivera and also Frida Kahlo. And she was trying to paint an athletic event. But I think this, to me, is more than just an athletic event. It speaks to the social mores and what was happening at the time. Eddie Tolan, Ralph Metcalf. Again, Metcalf would go on to race with Jesse Owens in the 36 Olympics. As part of the program, we could not have Wayne Wilson, who's a sports historian in Los Angeles. But I think we have a brief video of one of his talks before the Culver City Historical Society. And then at that point in time, we'll have Mark Herwick come up. And Mark's going to take a look at some of the ephemeral and lasting legacies of the 32 Olympics.
Amsterdam hosted the games. So By the time that the games got to Los Angeles, we were in the 10th Olympiad. And that is why, the 10th Olympiad is why 10th Street became Olympic Boulevard, which is what we know it as today.
It's not projected.
So the effort to bring, come on up front, people, there are lots of spaces.
It was working earlier. Maybe you started again, or...
The effort to bring the Los Angeles Games, Los Angeles began in 1919 when a group of local boosters with newspaper and real estate interests formed some.
Oh, that's not.
Is it embedded in the PowerPoint, or is it just streaming?
Should be. Oh, maybe I can turn off the PowerPoint. Let's see, PowerPoint.
Let's
Turn that off. Okay, maybe it's competing with one another. It worked a little while ago.
Yeah, it was on
Something called the California Fiestas Association. This was a group dedicated to promoting Los Angeles, growing Los Angeles, and among its agenda items were the creation of a large sports stadium and bringing the Olympic Games to Los Angeles. The association president was a man named William May Garland. Garland was a real estate mogul, and in 1919, he traveled to Antwerp to attend a meeting of the International Olympic Committee, where he made a pitch for Los Angeles to host the next games. The committee received him cordially, but they did point out that Paris had already been selected to host the 24 games, and that a strong commitment also had been made to Amsterdam to host the 1928 games. However, the IOC was impressed by Garland. They asked him to become a member of the committee, and they also left the door open for a future bid for Los Angeles to host the games. We doing okay? The Fiestas Association dissolved in 1920 and was reconstituted as the Community Development Association, which also continued the campaign to create a large sports stadium in Los Angeles and to bring the games to Los Angeles. And in 1923, both of those objectives were realized. The Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum opened in that year, and Garland, who at this point was an IOC member, traveled to Europe, where he again made a pitch for Los Angeles to host the games. The IOC agreed, and that is how the 32 games came to be here. Now, it's interesting to note that Garland made a pitch that was very similar to the message put forth nearly a century later by the bid committee for the Los Angeles 2024 and 2028 games. The 28 bid committee, with its sun-kissed angel and its slogan, "Follow the Sun," was selling the same thing that Garland did many years earlier, namely the beaches, the weather, and the movie industry. So the 1932 games were organized by the 10th Olympiad Committee using money from a state bond. The games ran from July 30th to August 14th. The Olympic Stadium in 32, as it was in 1984, was the Colloquium at Expo Park. And the 1932 games produced a number of Olympic firsts. For one thing, female stars for the first time in the summer game, or female athletes for the first time in the summer games were stars, and the brightest star of all, according to not just of the women, the brightest star of all of the athletes, according to Grantland Rice, who was the leading sports writer of the day, was the woman in the middle, who was Babe Dietrichson. She was an athlete from Beaumont, Texas. She won 2 medals, 2 gold medals and 1 silver medal in track and field. 32 was also the first time that Asian athletes played a prominent role in the games. And the Japanese team primarily on the strength of its men's swimming team, won more medals than Great Britain did and won more gold medals than Germany did. We also saw in 1932 the emergence of African American men in track and field. It wasn't the first time that African American men had competed in track and field, but it's the first time that they really made an impact in terms of winning medals. And we saw for the first time in the Summer Games the Olympic ceremony as we know it today. And what I mean by that is we saw for the first time athletes standing on a podium, listening to the national anthem of the gold medalist, and that event happening right after their competition. Prior to that, in the Summer Games, it had been different. And then the other really noteworthy first in 1932 was the Olympic Village. This was the first time that a real village was built. The one in 32 was built near Culver City in Baldwin Hills. That village housed the male athletes. The women were at a hotel in downtown Los Angeles called the Chapman Hotel. Now, I say Baldwin Hills, and almost every source that you will look at will say that the games were in Baldwin Hills, but to be really specific about it, the village was in the neighborhood that today we would call Windsor Hills or View Park. It was up above Stalker, and in that neighborhood today there are two streets. One is Olympiad Drive, and the other is Athenian Way. Now, the two most obvious intersections between Culver City and the 1932 games involved the film industry and the Helms bakeries. I mentioned earlier that Garland, when he was proposing that Los Angeles host the games, really talked up the movie industry. And the movie industry was quite involved in the festivities that surrounded the games. Douglas Fairbanks Jr. and Mary Pickford, who at the time were married to each other and who were stars for the Triangle Motion Picture Company in Culver City, were instrumental in promoting the games and entertaining athletes and dignitaries during the event. In fact, they hosted a formal dinner at their cutely named mansion in Beverly Hills, which was called the Pig Fair Mansion, for members of the International Olympic Committee, the National Olympic Committees, the International Sports Federation, and the Organizing Committee. A few days earlier than that, Louis B. Mayer had hosted a lunch at the MGM studios in Culver City for IOC members, their wives, and selected past Olympic champions. And that event included not only the lunch, but a tour of the facility or the studio for the dignitaries who got to see several movies being made, including that starred, among others, John and Ethel Barrymore and John Huston. The other Culver City connection in 32 was the Helms Bakeries. The Helms Bakeries opened in 1931 under the leadership of Paul Helms. Helms had been a coxswain for the rowing team at Syracuse University and had a lifelong interest in sports. And he took full advantage of the 1932 games by applying for and winning the contract to supply baked goods to the Olympic Village. He won that competition and immediately declared Helms bread as the official bread of the Olympic Games. So this is the bakery, and as you will see, Helms also took the Olympic logo, the Olympic motto, Citius Altius Fortius, took the American Olympic Committee logo, and took the words official and Olympic and put them together. And he legally registered all of those trademarks because the American Olympic Committee and the International Olympic Committee, in their wisdom, had failed to do so. All of this, of course, gave the Helms Bakery a great deal of publicity, and it also affiliated the Helms brand with the largest cultural event in Southern California history. I mentioned earlier that 1932 produced a lot of Olympic firsts, but perhaps the most significant thing about the 32 games in terms of Olympic history is that despite taking place in the Great Depression And despite attracting fewer nations and athletes than the 1928 Games in Amsterdam had, the Los Angeles Games established the Olympics as a mega event. It established the Olympic Games as a large-scale international event with dramatic appeal that captured the attention of the world. In the lead up to the Games, the organizing committee ran a sophisticated public relations and communications campaign that sent regular Olympic updates to media outlets throughout the world, printed in 6 different languages, and also used a volunteer army of 1,500 amateur ham radio operators in Southern California to push the Olympic message throughout the world to their counter.
All of these presentations so far have been extremely interesting. I appreciate everyone participating. And Helms Bakery, very entrepreneurial. That's the American way. I'm going to spend some time with a few written comments, and then I'm going to try to go through a number of slides fairly swiftly. So, being in line with the Olympics, I hope everyone has their tennis shoes on because we will be moving quickly through these slides. But I think you'll find them entertaining. My name is Mark Herwick, and thanks for attending today. By trade, I'm a land use planner. I think about land, how it's organized and used by people and animals, how our social relationships are contingent on land, and how land can be used to benefit many, or conversely to benefit a few at the expense of many. The use of land is a physical manifestation of societal norms and values. Its use for the built environment structures social behaviors and impacts the natural world. Land is a commodity, yet fundamental for humans' existence. It's cultivated, sold, bought, lived upon, some of it treasured, much of it used pragmatically for housing, industry, commerce, and recreation. As a commodity, land is the currency of property owners, developers, politicians, governments, entrepreneurs, social activists, business, and environmentalists, just to name a few. So what roles do these actors play in using land to secure and conduct mega events, such as the Summer Olympics? Were the past 2 Summer Games held in Los Angeles merely pragmatic economic development schemes, plucking bits and pieces of the urban landscape to cobble together a fleeting display of athletic prowess? Or did they play a vital role in shaping and stabilizing the metropolis through the roaring 20s and into the throes of the Depression? Or in 1984, showcase the metropolis as an icon of the free market on a global stage? Was it all profit at any cost? Or was a lasting cultural ethos of metropolis-wide community development initiated? Did the 32 Games shape the metropolitan landscape to a lasting effect? Or did the land uses and geography of the metropolis create an LA flavor of Olympics that proved even more profitable for the 84 Games? These are some questions we may wish to discuss as we consider lessons learned for informing the 2028 Games. But let's first explore the landscape of the 32 Games. What were the land uses and how did they allow the conduct of the Games? What role did land use agencies play? Were developers part of the mix? What legacies from the landscape prevailed to structure the 84 Games and are still relevant today as the 2028 Games approach? So now we're going to go through our slides and let's see how we do here. So I'm going to start off, we got to start somewhere. And the ranchos to me is a great place to start thinking about Los Angeles. As we know, the ranchos sort of shaped many of the development patterns that we see in Los Angeles today. And of particular interest to me is the Rancho Cienega. And Rancho Cienega, we'll talk a little bit more about it, but it played a central role in the 32 Games and in shaping Los Angeles. This map from 1930, AAA, I love AAA maps. I got this one because they were giving them away free a couple years ago with the membership, so I got it scanned and put it up here. The real fact of the matter is by 1930, the pattern of Los Angeles had already been established. It was sprawled, really substantiated by rail and roads, and we also know that Pacific Electric Rail was massively important in shaping the movement and sprawl of Los Angeles. So in many ways, the landscape upon which the Olympics were imposed was already established. It was sprawled out. And what I've done is these red dots are a few places from the 32 Olympics that I find are interesting and I'm going to focus in on today. I don't look at all of the venues that were part of the Olympics in 32 because there were other important ones. There was the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. There was the Long Beach Harbor where a lot of rowing events occurred. But I'm going to focus on this swath, east-west, from downtown out toward the coast. The stadium went up and it started construction in 22. It was ready for use in 1923. It was already in competition with the Rose Bowl up in Pasadena. Construction went very swiftly, and this is an instance of the Colloquium and Exposition Park following the games. And this was in December 1932. It was probably a really nice day in LA on that day. It looks pretty good, and it looks way better than 30 years before when it was agricultural park, where people were very upset about it being a place of vice and a bunch of other not nice things going on, and it had obviously been changed. And another key building for the 1932 Olympics was the Olympic Auditorium, which was built as well too, specifically with the intent of putting LA on the map and having some places for folks to have some athletic events. And it did okay in 32, but it was not used again in the 84 Olympics, and nor is it going to be used in the 2028 Olympics. It's still there. It's a church. What I find fascinating is the Olympic Village. The Regional Planning Commission, which had just been established in 1923, hadn't even developed the zoning code for the unincorporated areas of Los Angeles County, but it worked on that and had a zoning code by 1927, and they were obviously aware of things going on in Los Angeles, those 5 planning commissioners. And they had really great graphic artists. If you look at the materials and the artwork on planning materials in the 1920s and 30s, it's terrific. Anyhow, the word was getting out about the Olympics, and the Regional Planning Commission probably got wind of it. They still didn't have a zoning code. It was brand new, so most of the unincorporated area was zoned M3, unrestricted. Kind of do whatever you want to do, and if you're going to do something really egregious, you need to come and get a permit sometimes. So, sometimes. So in 1930, when the idea of the village was just really coming up to the fore, like, oh my God, we got to have these Olympics happen, we got to do something, and the powers that be in the Olympic Organizing Committee decided, let's build a village to house all the athletes, and we're going to do it so that it's really cheap, only $2 a day. They had to start thinking about where it's going to be. Well, it was in Baldwin Hills. It was in an unincorporated LA County. M3 zoning, unrestricted, do whatever you want. So, I think there was a lot of probably backstage activity saying like, yeah, go ahead and build a village. So, but the Planning Commission did see a drawing, which a staff artist from the commission did prepare, and this is it. I think it's a fascinating thing to take a look at. It's very, very detailed. 2 years later, the Pacific Electric magazine, which all the Pacific Electric employees took a look at, it was front and center, the same drawing as they were getting ready for the Olympics to occur in just a few months. So there were also very interesting site plans drawn up that the health department, county health department, took a look at to see how to organize, the health department had a booklet of a lot of materials about the village, which the Huntington has, which is a terrific thing to take a look at, and you can look at it online. This site plan shows where all the different athletes are going to be. It lists it all up here, and you've got all these bungalows. There's 550 of them, are also called cottages, and it shows the distribution of the athletes, which is fascinating. Okay, you get to the Olympic Village. They had to build it. They built it very, very quickly, within a couple months, starting in April of 1932. They got to get everybody moved in. These are little prefab places, as Ken had talked about. They were about the size of a cargo shipping container, and we think about those a lot today for housing, don't we? So anyway, but they prefab, put them all together real quick. Got to get everybody a bed to sleep in. This is the grand entrance to the Olympic Village. Right, really at the intersection of Monteith and Athenian Way in Culver City, in the Baldwin Hills in the Community Park. I think this is a pretty neat view of the village, looking east and down into Los Angeles. These folks had a really terrific view. They did for 2 weeks when they were in the village, all males, getting ready for their athletic events every day. This is another fantastic photo. It just, it's like the suburbs, right? But it was a temporary village for our athletes. This is a really terrific image of it, of what it looked like when it's in operation boom, this is what it looks like today. Fully developed. So what it's telling you is that Los Angeles, back in the day, there was a lot of land. People were parking their land, using it for something at one particular time. When it came time to do something different, they did it. And so, however, what was interesting is that the village was a great concept, and I think we lost out on it in some ways, and I'll talk about it a little bit later. Anyhow, it was taken down very rapidly, but it was another 15 years before this development even happened. But it did, thanks to suburbanization, post-World War II, etc. The other place where the women stayed, athletes, was Chapman Park Hotel, a very neat-looking place that Ken talked about a little bit. Here's another little view of it. Oh, you know, hey, there was a lot of PR about that place, but boom, it's gone now too. The bungalows are gone. See, we've got that really great big building. The Equitable Plaza building is in its place. A few little kind of neat buildings from the old days are still there, but that's what is there now. And that's imagery from about a month ago. The other neat place was Riviera Country Club, way out there on the coast, not far from Santa Monica, not far from where I live, and actually it's a very exclusive country club. I can't get into it. You can't even look inside of it. But anyhow, it's there, and they have a lot of great golf club events, etc. Back when it was established, I think in 1926, it was really focused a lot on equestrian activities, in addition to, I think, a little bit of golf. So what did they do in the 32 Olympics? They had an equestrian event. See the folks up there doing all their thing, which was cool. But equestrianism kind of went away at that location, and so they don't do horses there anymore. So all they do is golf. So the 84 Olympics did not make use of the Riviera Country Club. However, it's going to be used again in the 28 games, and it'll be used for golf. Now, what's really, really interesting is, see where all these tennis courts are? That's where all the other equestrian activity happened in the 1932 Olympics. So times have obviously changed. Real quick, I talked about the Rancho Cienega. The Baldwin family owned that, an important player in the politics and the economy of Los Angeles in the late 1900s, early 20th century. However, there was a rancho there, considered an adobe there, the Sanchez Adobe, considered the oldest in Los Angeles. It played a bit of it's had many, many different roles, and in fact, it was remodeled, boom, to be a country club for the Sunset Fields golf course. The Sunset Field golf course played a pretty big role in the pentathlon of the 32 games, and this is what it looked like. I mean, this was 8 years later, but still it's sort of the same thing. In 1932, what you had was, and it was the pentathlon, you know, that's 5 different events: shooting, running, riding a horse and stuff, and running, and one other one, swimming, I believe. But anyway, this great big golf course, about 300 acres, is right at the foothills of the Baldwin Hills. There were 25 athletes. The Adobe, which is the country club, is right up there. And these 25 male athletes, I think one dropped out, they ran around here up the hill for about 3 hours and went in front of the country club twice. Boom, that was the end of it. So that's a very ephemeral type of Olympic activity, but it's interesting. Real quick too, this shows the Baldwin right up here in the corner. That's where the Olympic Village was. See, 8 years later, not much happening. So that Olympic Village could have probably been used for something otherwise, but anyway, it didn't. Boom, here we go. This is the same place where the country club was, fully and completely developed these days. Absolutely and fully completely developed. The Adobe is still here. It's way up in the corner up there, but it's still there. Another ephemeral thing. Well, here's a greater, closer look at that. So anyway, we looked at things, part of the landscape of the geography of the 32 Olympics had lasting edifices. We think of the Colloquium, we think of the Olympic Auditorium, and also the vision of the village, which has been shaped many, many times thereafter. And then lastly, a couple things, events happened and not much left. But they're still part of our state of mind for the Olympics. Lastly, I'd like to go over a few quick maps that have been used that were used for the various Olympics. This map right here is fascinating. I love it. There's an artist, Mary Atwood, that drew all this, and I think that Mary Atwood did a number of other things as I researched her in Southern California. But this map was created by Union Oil. Union Oil, footed the whole bill for this map, and they made it available at all their Union 76 stations and everywhere else. It's really detailed and really neat, but there's a great big story on the backside of it about the virtues of Union Oil, driving, all kinds of other things. So, and it had all these little kind of activities for you to take a look at. Like you could drive up to various places along the coast and everything when you're here in Los Angeles for the Olympics. This was the official Olympic map in the program, which is quite fascinating to look at as well too. I love maps. There's many stories that can be told from them. This is the #84 Olympic map. Wow, it's very friendly. And that eagle does everything. And the 32 Olympics are sprawled out. We're really sprawled out, as Rick noted as well too. And so anyway, that eagle can do anything. Now we're into the 28 Olympics, and here we are now. And sort of think about the landscape of the 28 Olympics. This was what was first proposed, sort of a concept, a clusters concept, not really much different than what we've been thinking about in the past. Use what you've got. So they're using what they've got. You got downtown, you got the coast, you go up into the San Fernando Valley, which I don't know if we did that much in the past, maybe in '84, and then down, to Long Beach and everything. So that's all neat. But then, boom, they come out with their most recent map, and it's a mind blower. And the reason for that is it's cockeyed. It certainly shows sort of these clusters, but my sensibilities are all whacked out. So if me as an Angelino thinking we're going to have the third Olympics here, I won't know how to get around because I'm going to have to turn it sideways all the time. Anyway, those I want to close real quick again on the Olympic Village. I think the Olympic Village may have been a lost opportunity. And let me just say this. The planning and ingenuity that went into creating the Olympic Village was amazing. I mean, when you dig deep into this, all kinds of things were happening. And they did it in a very short period of time, and those folks got a great view. And it modeled future villages. But it was really an opportunity lost, particularly given the conditions of the times. Why so adamant to take it down immediately? I know there were many reasons. However, it demonstrated an insensitivity to those who could have benefited from housing. I mean, that could have been reused. Maybe not for a long, long period of time, but there were people down in the basin of LA that were having a tough time. Why wasn't it used? And so, if only the commitment shown by Olympic organizers to create the village could have been channeled otherwise to equitably redistribute components of the village after the games for those in need, maybe just for a few months until the shelf life of the prefab housing had expired. So the 2028 games will need to consider how to leave lasting social benefit for the disadvantaged rather than what is sometimes critiqued as hoovering up resources and leaving a vacuum. Thank you. And I am going to introduce our important speaker, Barry Siegel, and his book, Dreamers and Schemers. Thank you.
Well, greetings. First of all, let me just say it was nice to see Wayne Wilson up on the screen. He retired now. He was the head of the LA '84 Foundation Sports Library in West Adams. If you ever want to research a book about sports, particularly the Olympics, that place is it. And Wayne Wilson helped me a great deal while I was researching this book, Dreamers and Schemers. And if he were here, I'd hug him. But it's nice to be with all of you in this wonderful setting at the Huntington. I spent a lot of time at the Huntington also while researching Dreamers and Schemers. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to revisit. I'm aware that one purpose here today is to help in the planning of the 2028 or imagining of the 2028 games by looking back into history and seeing what lessons we can learn from the 1932 and 1984 games. So let me start by identifying what might be two of the more fundamental lessons from 1932. Number one, control the narrative. And you'll see what I mean in a minute. Control the narrative. And number two, sell 'em sunshine. That was LA Times publisher Harry Chandler's favorite mantra. But I'd like to just expand on that. Let's make it Selim Sunshine and Dreams. To show what I mean, I'd like to walk through the narrative of how the 1932 games came to LA and how it came to be such a huge, legendary, and consequential success. The narrative begins with the arrival of William May Garland in 1890. Southern California, he was 24 then, from Maine, in search of a warm climate to ease his chronic lung problems. Wild, outlandish land boom in Southern California had just gone bust. Millionaires had become indigents. 60 new towns had turned to grain fields. The bust shocked many residents of Los Angeles, with some fleeing, some questioning the future, and some jumping off bridges. But where others saw a debacle, Billy, as he looked around, saw only opportunity and possibility. The population of LA then stood at 50,000. Bean fields covered the future Beverly Hills, fig orchards the future Hollywood. Up unpaved roads, open water ditches, horses and buggies hitched in front of stores. Billy looked at it all and promptly began to imagine a city that didn't exist. Growth would shape the future. Billy was certain of that. Real estate values would rise along with population. They just needed to promote their region, or rather their notion of the region. That was sometimes hard to do. LA in the early 20th century was a lively, wide-open town full of visionary dreamers, but also schemers, hustlers, political graft, shady developers, and sex scandals, Hollywood bad behavior, murders and murder trials, scams and power brokers, road cops and city hall string pullers, mobsters and bootleggers. And atop it all, the hidden shadow government, comprised of a cadre of wealthy Los Angeles businessmen, bankers, developers, all WASP, all men, of course, all members of the same exclusive downtown private clubs that barred Jews, Catholics, people of color, women, and anyone with questionable social standing. They presided over a city segregated by class and race. Some of them, in truth, could be counted among the schemers and hustlers, including Billy. Yes, there he was in 1903, being sued over a shady real estate deal, what the LA Times called a sizzling, sensational lawsuit. He apparently had swindled members of the Crocker family while representing them in the sale of a downtown LA building. Yet there was Billy also in countless newspaper headlines, being quoted, giving speeches, writing columns, leading parades, flying in one of the first ever biplanes, motoring in his new 1911 Pierce Arrow. A member of the shadow government in LA, for sure, but Billy was not at all hiding in the shadows. Instead, always, he was seeking to build that city that didn't yet exist. It still didn't quite exist in 1918, when Billy, by then known as the Prince of Realtors, was ushered 5 men into his office in downtown LA, the publishers of LA's major newspapers. Yeah, we had 5 then. Including Harry Chandler from the Los Angeles Times. Quote, the Times, "There is a temporary lull in the financial and business activity in Los Angeles just at present," the Times had reported in a recent story. A nationwide quarantine to combat the growing Spanish flu pandemic, coupled with uncertainty about the Great War, is all having its effect, and as a result, there is considerable lethargy in financial circles. Looking out Billy's windows, they could literally see the lethargy. The streets were deserted. sort of like what we went through a couple of years ago. The streets were deserted, everything shut down by city health officials, the movie industry and scores of other businesses were losing millions of dollars daily. Even worse was the severe decline in tourism. By itself a lucrative industry, tourism, more importantly, sold the advantages of Southern California and induced visitors to return, buy homes, start businesses. To the public, the LA Times might call it a temporary lull, but the men sitting in Billy's office were not so positive. How to counter this lull? How to prevent future downturns? Out of this meeting came the initial idea to bid and stage the Olympics Games as a means to put LA on the map and, of course, draw tourists, migrants, and investment. Who benefited from the Games? Well, lots of people, including, of course, the athletes, but above all, the developers, the realtors, the bankers and financiers, the capitalists. That LA was still a cow town at this moment, only the 10th largest city in the United States, virtually unknown in the grand European capitals that had always hosted the Games, did not give them pause. Months later, an organizing committee, yes, that originally was the California Fiesta Association, later the California Development Association, CDA, made it official. Yes, they would bid for the Olympic Games, even though they had no idea how to do that or what it would cost. Their ignorance was probably for the best. More knowledgeable men might not have taken on the challenge. So off Billy went in 1923 to the International Olympic Committee, IOC, annual meeting in Rome, where this self-made man improbably convinced the barons and earls to give LA the 1932 Olympics. It didn't hurt his cause that by then the Colloquium in LA already existed, built not after winning the bid, but in 1921 to 23 as a means of securing the bid. It's fascinating how this happened, fascinating. The CDA's 8-man executive committee, in deciding to bid for the Olympics, at the same time started pushing the notion of a huge public sporting facility that would host major events, such as conventions, meets, festivals. LA had no such facility in 1920, and very few existed anywhere in the country. But the Big Eight now declared that a 75,000-seat stadium was essential. They commissioned the noted architect John Parkinson to draw up tentative stadium blueprints. The LA City Council, in turn, approved putting a bond measure on the local ballot as a means to finance the project. But, the voters turned down the bond issue. So the Colosseum was built not with public funds, but by Billy's banker buddies, who leased land in Exposition Park from the city and county, built the stadium on their own dime, somewhere over $800,000 at the time, then rented it back to the city and county for 10 years, effectively recovering their construction costs. At that point, they turned it over the stadium to the local governments to own and operate. In building a stadium that citizens had voted down, Billy's gang demonstrated both great vision and the arrogance of power. Despite being an unelected elite, their insistence on building the Colosseum carried LA into the future. It also didn't hurt Billy's cause as he bid for the Games in Rome that Hollywood's movies were by then enthralling the world. Asked one IOC member after the vote in Rome, Billy, I voted for Los Angeles because I like you personally, but where is Los Angeles? Is it anywhere near Hollywood? Billy knew enough to play that card. Yes, yes, he replied, it's a suburb of Hollywood. Having won the bid for the 1932 games in 1923, the city had 9 full years to prepare, and Billy spent those years spiffing up the city with street widening and landscaping projects while fixing on venues for the various events, which I think Ken and Mark have pretty well identified. Thank you. In some places they used what they had, and a few were built in the 20s, as we've mentioned. Obviously the Colloquium, the Long Beach Marine Stadium for rowing, Grand Olympic Auditorium, boxing, wrestling, weightlifting, and the Riviera Country Club, as you saw photos of, for equestrian events. Key point. None of what they built was only or specifically for the Olympics. All involved future use plans that would serve the community well beyond the duration of an Olympiad. What we are really seeing here are developers and realtors that work in the roaring 20s building Los Angeles. For example, in early October 1923, just as the Colosseum officially opened, so did the grand downtown hotel that Billy Garland had desired for LA, the Biltmore. Same year, built up by a syndicate of businessmen led by Harry Chandler at a cost of $10 million. Within a year, the syndicate would expand the hotel, adding 500 new guest rooms, a swimming pool, and the world's then biggest ballroom. This allowed Los Angeles to boast of having the largest hotel west of Chicago. 9 years later, on the eve of the 1932 Summer Olympics, the Biltmore would host the game's opening ceremonial dinner and grand reception for IOC members and 2,000 leading citizens. LA's growth exploded in this era, driven by the boosters' extraordinary promotions. In the decade 1920 to 1930, more than 2 million people would move to California, nearly 3/4 of them settling in Southern California, with LA County growing by some 1.2 million, the city of Los Angeles by 661,000, tripling its population. This, not incidentally, fueled a huge appreciation in real estate values. Here was the hand of man at work, Billy's hand, Prince of Realtors. Yet the city's elite, even while celebrating, perceived threats to their dream of Southern California. On June 24th, 1923, a strange but revealing editorial appeared in Harry Chandler's Los Angeles Times, bearing the title "The Soul of the City." It began, "We are living in a day of great things. In the population, we are making a progress that almost baffles comparison. Our numbers are being swelled by trainloads every day." Despite this, something worried the editorial writers. Quote, "But if our material greatness is worthy of world comment, are we keeping pace in spiritual progress? What of the soul of the city?" And that brought the editorial writers to the heart of the matter. Quote, "The conditions which exist here should make for the finest character building in the land. We should have more than the ordinary proportion of patriotism because our citizens are mainly the descendants of American pioneers. As a city, we have no vast foreign districts in which strange tongues are ever heard. The community is American, clear to its backbone." This editorial, it's fair to say, reflects certain deep strains rippling through Los Angeles and the country at the time. Class conflict, labor unrest, cultural and social tensions, the Red Scare, fears over the influx of immigrants. All of this would concern someone in Billy and Harry's position. But Billy avoided public comment about such matters. He had other types of threats to deal with. Among them, the Community Development Association's 1928 vote to abandon the 1932 games. Abandon the games. What happened? In the summer of 1928, Zach Farmer, the CDA's general secretary, returned from a scouting mission in Europe with an alarming report about deteriorating conditions there. Quote, LA and California stand to lose far more than either might gain from the Olympic experience, he warned. At a meeting in late August, the stunned committee members pondered what to do. As it happened, Billy Garland wasn't present. He'd remained in Europe after the Olympic Games in Amsterdam. And Harry Chandler wasn't yet there. He would arrive late to this meeting. Here was a room of bold, confident city leaders, really the shadow government of LA, but they almost immediately voted to abandon the games. Then Harry Chandler showed up. Finally, he urged his colleagues to rescind their resolution and reconsider after Billy's return, when he wanted to get Billy back in front of them. They reluctantly agreed. Billy arrived home 10 days later, and at a decidedly intense meeting managed to convince the committee to move forward on the games. No one in LA at the time knew about this vote to abandon the games. Billy kept it secret for years. Instead, that fall and winter, he campaigned vigorously for statewide passage of a $1 million Olympic Bond Act, which voters approved on November 6th, providing much-needed funding for the games. Games that had almost been canceled just weeks before. Then, in October 1929, came Billy's biggest obstacle: the crash of the stock market and the country's plunge into the Great Depression. Billy had won his bid for the games during rollicking high times, roaring 20s, without knowing he'd be trying to stage the games in the depths of the Great Depression, when no countries could afford to send teams and when no spectators could afford to come to LA. In 1930, at the IOC annual meeting in Berlin, Billy rose to address the opening day session, fully realizing that the IOC at this gathering might very well cancel the 1930 Games. Besides an exhaustive report, he brought with him a reel of motion pictures compiled by MGM Studios. And talked about the architect's plans for a two-pool Olympic swimming station and an expansion of the Colloquium to 105,000 seats. Second, and this was the bombshell, Billy announced that the total cost of the round trip for European contests would be $400 per athlete, 1/4 of the expected $2,000. He had succeeded in getting 40% rate reductions from the railroad and steamship companies. There was more. For lodging and meals, LA proposed to build that Olympic village, the first ever in the history of the Games. This village, with 550 two-bedroom cottages on 320 acres, would provide, every nation would have separate quarters and cooking facilities, be living together. Most important, and the reason for the village really, the cost would be just $2 a day per athlete. The IOC effectively wooed, didn't cancel because of this. But still, two years later, Billy still found desperate hours, still faced desperate hours in the spring of '32. Almost no countries had committed to compete, no spectators had brought tickets. Depths of the Great Depression. Unemployment in California stood at 20%. Evicted families pulled their tattered belongings down LA's clogged sidewalks. Soup kitchens rose in the shadow of the Colosseum. Suicide statistics kept climbing, with 75 people so far jumping from the Colorado State Bridge in Pasadena. More desolate, unhoused refugees from America's heartland were arriving in LA every week. In an almost surreal way, those planning the Olympics were dwelling in a parallel universe, sealed off from a country racked by angry riots, smoky, damp Hoovervilles, and the bonus army band of 20,000 starving World War veterans encamped on the Capitol grounds in ever more desperate conditions. Against this backdrop, with people hungry and homeless, it was difficult to justify sending athletes halfway across the globe for a track meet. Angry protesters, and they did have many angry protesters in '32, were demonstrating at the state capitol in Sacramento, brandishing placards that called for groceries, not games. An LA activist seeking jobs marched through the streets one night, breaking windows in stores that displayed Olympic pennants. California's Governor Jim Rolfe thought it impossible to stage the games. What do they want? Riots, he asked. Billy held firm. His public remarks even now remain positive. What the region needed, he kept explaining, was a big, rousing, blues-chasing party that would show how stout the public spirit remained. No surprise, LA's elite worked hard always to obscure whatever ran contrary to their boosterism. They were expert at fashioning myths and illusions about their city. Now the 1932 Games seem to have become a part of that tradition, an extension of that world, another myth, another illusion, another glittering mirage shaped by an untouchable circle of shrewd visionaries. That glittering mirage, however, couldn't quell the mounting number of doubters, who in time started calling the 1930 Games Garland's Folly. The 10th Olympiad promised to be an historic flop. Even some members of the LA Olympic Organizing Committee were now calling for a last-minute cancellation of the game. A showdown with them came early that spring of 1932 at a tense meeting at the LA Athletic Club where Billy was the longtime president. He attacked the cold feeders. That's what he called them, cold feeders. We have given the IOC our word, he insisted. Would you forget honor and walk away? The next day, Billy ordered the printing of 2 million tickets for the 1932 Olympic Games. And he played one more card, again, Hollywood. He approached the celebrated movie stars, Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks, King and Queen of Hollywood, with a request. Would they take to the radio to urge everyone to come to the Games? Pickford and Fairbanks, then considered the most popular couple in the world, readily agreed. As Billy well knew, no couple could be more influential for the Olympic Games than for LA. On July 7th, Pickford and Fairbanks were the featured speakers on a one-hour worldwide radio program, with Pickford leading a group of the Hollywood Bowl, Fairbanks at the Colloquium, both inviting the world to attend the Games. There was a final card to play: the athletes. Across the country in mid-July, the American Olympic trials in swimming and in track and field began for both men and women. At these meets, the athletes would amaze the country with their record-breaking accomplishments. Among those were the two superstar black sprinters, Eddie Tolan and Red Metcalf, the first superstar women athletes, including Babe Dickerson. These competitors would, in the end, do as much as the boosters and Hollywood stars to ignite American interest in the 1932 Olympics. And finally, it happened. The boosters' promotion, the Hollywood stars' plans, pleas, the American athletes' achievements, somehow combined, they began to take hold. A frenzy of ticket buying started in early July. And then during the week of the Olympic trials, ticket sales skyrocketed. 35,000 seats scooped up in 72 hours. It now appeared that everyone wanted to come to Los Angeles, that everyone was coming. What's more, LA was drawing more than spectators. The number of countries participating in the Games mushroomed at the last minute to 37, a pretty good number for the depths of the Depression. By the third week of July, visitors were thronging LA's hotels, and athletes from all over the world were arriving by ship and train. The scene involved Hollywood's luminaries as much as did the Olympians. The athletes were great motion picture fans and autograph hounds. Pursued such stars as Joan Crawford, Norma Shear, Douglas Fairbanks, Charles Chaplin, Gary Cooper, and vainly asked for Garbo. Didn't get her. The Argentine athletes caused a tumult one day at Paramount when 4 of them spotted and started chasing Marlene Dietrich. Not Garbo, but they got Dietrich. The mingling with the Hollywood continued even after the Games started, and we've talked about that. Louis B. Mayer invited them to MGM. Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford invited them to Pick Fair. Yes, in an almost surreal way, those experienced the Olympic Gala indeed were dwelling in a parallel universe. By the time of the 1932 Olympic Games, closing ceremony on August 14th, it was clear that the 10th Olympiad had been an astonishing and historic success. Some 1.75 million spectators had spent $1.5 million for tickets, more than doubling the attendance of any other games. No less than 16 world records had been broken, and of equal importance and even more rare, the first ever financial surplus had been realized from an Olympic Games, more than $1 million. A true fortune in the depths of the Great Depression, and enough to pay off the entire state bond issue. The 1932 Games most certainly signified a turning point in the Olympic movement, the crowds, the athletic achievements, the Olympic Village, the whole idea of the Games being a mega event, as Wayne Wilson said. All helped cement LA's legacy, LA Games' legacy. The 1932 Olympics also had a significant impact on the development of Southern California. 62 conventions were held in LA during the Games, and visitors left behind $60 million, more than $1.1 billion today. Many thousands chose to linger in the region for weeks after the Games, and not all were tourists. Some 500 registered with the Chamber of Commerce committee formed to create business contacts and stimulate international trade. Undeniably, the publicity surrounding the Games made Los Angeles famous. Billy Garland would never again have to pull out a map to show a diplomat the city's location. He and a supportive cadre of sports writers and publishers marketed the city as much as the Games. The culture of Hollywood and movie stars, the geography of mountains and sea and desert, the mythical history of mission ruins and Spanish fiestas, the climate of endless sun and mild temperatures, and above all, the notion of Southern California being a land of unlimited opportunity, a place where dreams can be realized. Even in a city that created itself largely through self-promotion, the Games stood out as an unsurpassed example of boosterism, a colossal feat of public relations. So, in winding up here, the lessons learned from 1932. Again, number one, control the narrative. You see what I mean? That's what they were doing the entire time. Number two, sell them sunshine plus dreams. Number three, mix in Hollywood, populate with movie stars. Number four, and perhaps the most important, ignore the critics and naysayers. Ignore the critics and naysayers. Doing all this yielded lasting consequences. In the 10 years following the Olympics, LA expanded rapidly. The original Farmers Market, Union Station, Griffith Observatory, LAX, and the nation's first freeway, the Arroyo Seco. Cleveland Rams became the LA Rams, making the Coliseum their home. By 1939, the population of LA stood at 1.6 million. By 1950, it was more than 2 million, surpassing Detroit as the fourth largest city in the country. The Dodgers arrived in 1958, knowing they could play in the Coliseum while constructing their own stadium. The Lakers landed 2 years later. The Coliseum, now a National Historic Landmark, may be the 1932 Games' most enduring legacy. Over the years, it's been host to the USC Trojans, UCLA Bruins, the Rams, the Raiders, the Chargers, the Dodgers, 3 NFL championship games, 2 Super Bowls, Billy Graham, Martin Luther King, Pope John Paul II, Nelson Mandela, and the Rolling Stones. 6 U.S. presidents also. Soon, of course, the third Summer Olympics. Quite an example of future use planning, I think. All this does not mean Billy and his colleagues truly transformed the mirage into reality. During the 1932 Games Olympics, the village and playing fields of the Coliseum offered havens of seeming equality, yet LA itself remained segregated by race and class. Through a range of covenants and restrictions, the members of the Japanese Olympic team learned firsthand when they attempted to enter dance halls and fancy, classy restaurants in LA during the 1932 Games. They found themselves blocked at the door by hosts saying Mexicans are not permitted. Clarifying that they were Japanese, not Mexicans, only made matters worse. So, a complicated, conflicted story. In the end, though, most everyone at least could agree Billy Garland had delivered what he promised: a big, rousing, blues-chasing party. For better and worse, good and ill, he had propelled Los Angeles into the future. The city, as always, was on its way. Thank you.